Harold Benson was 74 years old, and he hadn't slept lying down in 91 days. His wife Miriam was curled beside him in the passenger seat of their 2007 Honda Accord, a wool blanket pulled to her chin, her silver hair pressed flat against the window where condensation had formed from her breath. It was 6:47 in the morning, November, and the knock came 3 times. Not aggressive, not tentative, but steady. The kind of knock that expected an answer. Harold's eyes opened to a face he recognized but had never spoken to. The woman from the brick house on Chestnut Lane, the one who never waved back. She was standing in the gray light with a thermos in one hand and something terrible in her eyes. Not pity exactly, recognition. Harold had prepared himself for police, for security guards, for teenagers with phones taking pictures. So he had prepared himself for humiliation in all its modern forms. What he hadn't prepared for was someone who looked at him like she already knew the weight of what he was carrying, like she had carried something similar once herself, like she understood that some people end up sleeping in cars, not because they failed at life, but because life failed them first. The Bensons had lived on Marigold Street for 41 years. They bought the house in 1982 for $67,000, a 3-bedroom Cape Cod with yellow shutters and a front porch just wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. Harold had been 33 then, working as a machinist at the Greer manufacturing plant, pulling overtime shifts that kept him away from home but kept the mortgage paid. Miriam taught 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary, the same school their children would later attend, and the same hallways where she would one day see her own grandchildren walk through during holiday performances. They weren't wealthy people, they never had been, but they understood something about money that their children would never quite learn, that it was a tool, not a trophy, and that the point of having it was so that someday you wouldn't need to think about it at all. They paid off the house in 1999, 7 years early, and Harold still remembered the evening he made the final payment. He had driven to the bank himself, refused to mail it, wanted to hand the check to someone and watch them process it. On the way home, he stopped at the grocery store and bought a bottle of champagne for $23.99, the most expensive one they had. And he and Miriam sat on the porch that night, drinking it from coffee mugs because they couldn't find the good glasses. "We own it now," he said, and Miriam had laughed because of course they'd always owned it. They'd been paying for it for 17 years, but Harold shook his head. "No," he said. "Before, the bank owned it and we borrowed it. Now it's ours. Now nobody can take it." He believed that. He believed it for 24 more years. The Bensons had 3 children. David was the oldest, 51 now, a real estate attorney in Charlotte, who wore suits that cost more than Harold's first car. He visited twice a year, Thanksgiving and a single summer weekend, and when he came, he talked mostly about his cases, his clients, the complications of his second divorce. He never asked his parents how they were doing, not really. Not in the way that expected an honest answer. He asked the way people ask about weather, just to fill silence, already thinking about the next thing. Then there was Karen, 48, who lived in Denver with a husband Harold had only met 3 times and 2 teenage sons who communicated exclusively through text messages. Karen called on birthdays and holidays, always sounding rushed, always with background noise, an airport, a restaurant, a car. And finally, there was the youngest, Michael, 44, who had stayed closest to home. Michael lived 40 minutes away in a subdivision that had been farmland when Harold was young. Michael was the one who came to Sunday dinners when his schedule allowed, which over the years became monthly, then quarterly, then only when Miriam made a specific request with enough advance notice. Michael was also the one who had an idea 3 years ago about how to help his parents make the most of their retirement. "You're sitting on equity you're not using," he said. His eyes had that particular shine they got when he was excited about a number. "You could unlock it without giving up the house. It's called a reverse mortgage. It's designed for people exactly like you." Harold should have said no. He knew that now. He knew it in the way you know something only after the consequences have finished unfolding, after every door has closed and every appeal has been exhausted. But at the time, and this is the part that still burned, the part he replayed during those cold hours between 3 and 5 a.m. when Miriam slept and he couldn't. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Miriam's arthritis had gotten worse. The stairs were becoming a problem. They needed a walk-in shower, a stair lift, maybe eventually a bedroom on the main floor. Medicare covered some things, but not others. Their savings, which had seemed so solid when Harold retired at 68, had begun to shrink in ways that frightened him. The reverse mortgage would give them access to money without payments, Michael explained. They could stay in the house forever. The loan would only come due when they both passed away or moved out permanently. He made it sound like a gift they were giving themselves. He never mentioned the fees, which consumed $18,000 before they saw a dime. He never mentioned the variable interest rate, which started at 5.2% and climbed to 9.7% over 30 months. He never mentioned the insurance requirements, the inspection requirements, and the maintenance clauses buried on page 43 of a 61-page document that Harold signed without fully reading because his son had told him it was fine. His son had said, "Trust me." His son had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Dad, I do this for a living." The trouble began with a leak in the roof. It was October of last year, 13 months before that knock on the car window, and the leak was small at first. A dark stain on the ceiling of the guest bedroom, no bigger than a dinner plate. Harold climbed into the attic himself, found the damaged shingles, knew he couldn't fix them. His balance wasn't what it used to be. His knees screamed on ladders. He called a roofer who came out and looked at the damage and gave him a quote for $14,200. The roof was 28 years old, the man explained. Patching wouldn't help. It needed to be replaced entirely. Then Harold said he'd think about it. He thought about it for 2 weeks, during which the stain grew and spread and darkened. He called another roofer, then another. The quotes ranged from $12,800 to $19,000. He didn't have that kind of money. The reverse mortgage had given them access to funds, yes, but those funds had gone to the bathroom renovation, to medical bills for Miriam's hip replacement, to property taxes that had somehow tripled since they first moved in. Harold called the loan company to ask about drawing more equity. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "Your loan balance has reached 94% of your home's appraised value," she said. "There's nothing left to draw." Harold asked what that meant. "It means you've used what's available," she said. "And sir, I'm seeing a note here about a property inspection. Which you're required to maintain the home in good condition. If there's unrepaired damage, that could be a compliance issue." Harold said he understood. He did not understand. Not really. Not yet. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. It was from the loan servicer, and it informed Harold and Miriam Benson that a property inspection had found the home to be in violation of maintenance requirements. The roof damage, left unrepaired, constituted a threat to the property's value and integrity. They had 60 days to complete repairs and submit documentation. Failure to comply would result in the loan being called due in full. The amount owed was $287,411.36. Harold read the letter 3 times. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, put his head in his hands, and stayed there for 45 minutes without speaking. Miriam found him like that when she came in from watering the plants. She asked what was wrong. He handed her the letter. She read it once, looked at him, read it again. "How is this possible?" she said. Her voice wasn't loud, it wasn't panicked. It was the voice of someone watching something break that couldn't be fixed. "We paid off the house," she said. "We paid it off 25 years ago." "I know," Harold said. "I know we did." The next 60 days were a blur of phone calls that went nowhere, letters that received form responses, and one terrible conversation with Michael that ended with shouting and a dial tone. Harold had called his son to explain what was happening, to ask for help, to say we trusted you, and this is where it led. Michael's response was defensive and sharp. "I didn't make you sign anything," he said. "You're adults. You made your own decision. I tried to help. If you didn't understand what you were signing, that's not my fault." Harold wanted to say that he had understood exactly what he was signing because Michael told him he understood, because Michael explained it in terms that made sense, because Michael was his son, and Harold trusted his son the way he had always trusted his son, the way fathers trust the children they raised and fed, and drove to baseball practice and helped with homework and bailed out of trouble more times than either of them could count. But Harold didn't say any of that. He said, "We're going to lose the house." Michael was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad. Let me know if there's anything I can do." He did not offer anything specific. He did not offer money. He did not offer a room. Money he did not call back. David, when Harold finally reached him, was in a meeting. His assistant took a message. David returned the call 3 days later, listened for 2 minutes, and said he was very sorry, but real estate law wasn't his specialty, and he didn't know what to suggest. Maybe a bankruptcy attorney? He could ask around. He would get back to them. He did not get back to them. Karen, when Miriam called, cried a little and said, "Oh, Mom, that's awful," and asked if there was anything she could do from Denver. She suggested a GoFundMe page. She suggested a church fundraiser. She suggested things that involved other people doing the work, while she contributed her emotional support from 1,700 miles away. She said she loved them. She said she was praying for them. She did not offer her guest room, which had 2 beds and a private bathroom and sat empty 350 days a year. She did not offer money, though her husband made $280,000 annually, and they had just returned from 2 weeks in Portugal. The house sold at auction on August 15th. Harold and Miriam weren't there. They couldn't be. They had been served with an eviction notice the week before and had 14 days to vacate. The new owner, an LLC registered in Delaware, paid $241,000, less than the debt owed, which meant Harold and Miriam were still technically liable for $46,000 plus legal fees. They spent those 14 days trying to find somewhere to go. Every apartment they called required first month, last month, and security deposit, $3,600 to $5,400 for places that smelled like mildew and had bars on the windows. They had $2,100 in their checking account. Sir, the senior living facilities had wait lists of 9 to 14 months. The shelters were full or had age limits or separated men and women into different buildings, different rooms, different worlds. Harold was not going to be separated from his wife. Not after 52 years. Not for anything. On August 28th, they loaded what they could fit into the Accord: clothes, medications, a photo album, Miriam's grandmother's quilt, a wooden jewelry box that had been a wedding gift, the folder of documents they hoped might still matter, and they drove away from the house on Marigold Street for the last time. Harold did not look back. Miriam did. She watched in the side mirror until they turned the corner, and then she put her hand on Harold's knee and didn't say anything for a long time. The first night, they parked at a rest stop off Interstate 40, 22 miles outside of town. Harold told himself it was temporary. They would figure something out in the morning. He would make calls. He would find a solution. They had survived worse, hadn't they? The plant closing in '94 when he was out of work for 5 months. Miriam's cancer scare in 2011. The surgery. The recovery. David's accident in high school. The one that should have killed him. The 3 months of rehabilitation. They had survived all of it. They would survive this. He tilted his seat back as far as it would go, which wasn't far enough, and he closed his eyes, and he didn't sleep. Beside him, Miriam's breathing eventually slowed into something like rest, but he knew she wasn't really sleeping either. She was doing what she always did, being strong for him, being quiet so he wouldn't worry. Chan holding everything inside so there would be room left for him. He had never loved her more than he did in that moment, and he had never hated himself as much either. The days developed a rhythm, the way all days do, even terrible ones. They drove to the public library when it opened at 9 a.m. because the library had bathrooms and heat and chairs where you could sit for hours without anyone asking what you were doing. Harold used the computers to search for apartments, jobs, assistance programs. Everything required documentation he didn't have, or qualifications he couldn't meet, or wait lists he couldn't afford to wait for. Miriam sat in the reading section with large print books she couldn't concentrate on, watching the clock, watching the door, watching Harold's shoulders get more and more curved as the hours passed. At 5 p.m., yes, the library closed, and they drove to a different parking lot, a church lot, a hospital lot, a grocery store lot, and they ate whatever food they had been able to afford that day. Crackers from the dollar store, canned soup that Miriam heated on a small camp stove Harold bought for $18.99 at a sporting goods store back when they still had money for such things. Bananas that bruised too quickly, peanut butter they ate with plastic spoons. They didn't talk much during those meals. What was there to say? The cold came in late September, earlier than usual, and with it came the first real test of what their bodies could endure. Harold woke at 2:17 a.m. on September 23rd to find Miriam shivering so hard her teeth were chattering, the sound audible even through the layers of coats and blankets they had piled on themselves. Her fingers, then when he touched them, were ice. He started the car and turned on the heat, knowing that the gas needle was already below a quarter tank, knowing that every mile of warmth was a mile they couldn't drive. She needs to be inside, he thought. This can't go on. But where? David's house had 4 bedrooms and a finished basement with its own entrance. Karen's house had a guest suite and a sunroom with a pull-out couch. Michael's house was 40 minutes away in a subdivision built on what used to be farmland, and it had a bedroom that was used as an office, with a daybed for visitors. None of them had offered. None of them had called in weeks. Harold had his pride. He had always had his pride. It was the one thing he used to say that no one could take from you. He was wrong about that too. They moved closer to town as the nights got colder, whilst looking for places with better shelter from wind, more cover from rain. The parking lot behind the Goodwill store was good for a few nights, until a security guard asked them to leave. The back corner of the Methodist church lot was safer, but Harold felt strange about it, using the church without attending, taking without giving. Eventually, they found a spot on the edge of a residential neighborhood, a cul-de-sac that backed up to a small park, where the streetlights were spaced far apart and the houses were set back from the road. They parked there on October 3rd and stayed. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody seemed to care. The houses glowed with warm light in the evenings, and Harold could see families through the windows, children doing homework, parents in kitchens, the blue flicker of television screens. He wondered what they were watching. He wondered if any of them knew that 40 feet away, 2 people who had worked their whole lives, who had raised 3 children and paid their taxes and contributed to their community, were sleeping in a car because there was nowhere else for them to go. The woman from the brick house was named Della Morrison. She was 58 years old, divorced for 12 years, and she worked as a night shift supervisor at the distribution center off Route 9. She had lived on Chestnut Lane for 9 years, ever since the divorce, ever since she left Richmond with 2 suitcases and a dog named Buster, who died 3 years later of cancer, and she had spent most of that time keeping to herself. It wasn't unfriendliness, not exactly. It was protection. And the marriage had taught her things about people that she hadn't wanted to learn, that they could smile while they lied, that they could say, "I love you" while planning their exit, that the person sleeping next to you could become a stranger overnight if the circumstances were right. So she didn't wave to neighbors. She didn't make small talk at the mailbox. She didn't join the neighborhood association, or attend the block parties, or accept the invitations that showed up less and less frequently over the years. She lived inside her brick house with her routines and her cable TV, and the silence that had become, against all expectation, a kind of comfort. People thought she was cold. Let them think it. People thought she was rude. Fine. People didn't know that she volunteered every Saturday at the food pantry on Elm Street, say, or that she sent anonymous checks to families featured in the newspaper's holiday giving campaign, or that she still kept Buster's collar in her nightstand drawer because throwing it away felt like throwing away the only creature who had ever loved her without conditions. Della first noticed the car on October 7th. She was coming home from work at 7:30 in the morning, exhausted the way you get after 8 hours of standing and lifting and answering questions, and she saw the old Honda parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac where nobody usually parked. She didn't think much of it. People had visitors, people parked in strange places. But the car was there again the next morning, and the morning after that, and by the end of the week, she realized it was there every morning, always in the same spot, always with the windows fogged from breath, and always with shapes visible inside that looked like people sleeping. She told herself it was none of her business. She told herself there could be 100 explanations. She told herself that getting involved in other people's problems was how you got hurt, how you got used, how you ended up in the mess she'd spent 12 years climbing out of. But the nights got colder, and the car stayed, and she started noticing details. A flash of silver hair in the passenger seat, the slight movement of a blanket, the way the car rocked slightly when someone inside shifted position. These weren't teenagers. These weren't homeless drifters, not in the way she had always imagined homeless people. These were old people sleeping in a car at the end of a street where nobody looked, where nobody asked, and where everybody was too busy with their own lives to notice 2 lives disappearing in plain sight. 3 weeks passed. Della watched. She learned their schedule without meaning to. The car left around 8:30 most mornings and returned around 6 most evenings. Some nights, she could hear the engine running for a few minutes before it shut off, and she understood that they were using the heat, burning gas to stay warm, rationing warmth the way you ration food or hope. She started leaving for work a few minutes early just to see if they were still there. They always were. She started coming home a few minutes late to see if they had moved. They hadn't. She told herself she should call someone, social services, the police, a shelter, someone whose job it was to handle these things. Someone with training and resources and the right kind of authority. But she didn't call. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because she had seen the cops clear homeless camps near the overpass, had watched the cruelty disguised as procedure, had wondered where those people went afterward and why no one seemed to track them. Maybe it was because she knew from her food pantry work that shelters were full and waitlists were long, and the system was designed to process people, not help them. Or maybe, and this was the thought she kept pushing away, maybe it was because she saw something in that car that reminded her of herself. The effort to be invisible, the shame that radiated like heat, the way they kept to themselves, causing no problems, asking nothing, hoping only to be left alone with whatever dignity they had left. November 4th was the coldest morning of the season. Della saw it on her phone before she went to bed. Low of 29 degrees, wind chill in the low 20s, a frost advisory for the entire county. She lay in her bed for 3 hours, unable to sleep, thinking about the car, thinking about the silver hair, thinking about what 29 degrees felt like inside a Honda Accord with no heat because the gas was too precious to burn. She thought about her own parents, dead now for 15 years, but she remembered how her father's hands had looked toward the end, thin-skinned and bruised, cold even in warm rooms. She thought about what she would want someone to do if it were her father in that car, if it were her mother, if it were her. At 4:30 a.m., she got out of bed. She made coffee. She poured it into a thermos, the big one. The one she used on camping trips back when she still took camping trips. She put on her coat and her gloves, and she walked out her front door into darkness that was just starting to gray at the edges. The cold hit her face like a slap. Her breath made clouds. The street was silent except for the distant hum of the highway, and she walked toward the car at the end of the cul-de-sac with her heart beating too fast and her mind cycling through all the ways this could go wrong. What if they were dangerous? What if they screamed at her? What if they were dead? What if she opened her mouth and nothing useful came out? She almost turned back 3 times. She didn't. She reached the car, saw the fog on the windows, saw the shapes inside, and she knocked 3 times. Steady, the way someone knocks when they have something to say. Harold's eyes opened first. The disorientation lasted only a second. He was used to waking in the car now, used to the stiffness and the ache and the gray confusion of mornings that all looked the same. But the face in the window was new. The face in the window was the woman who never waved, the woman from the brick house, the woman he had seen 100 times from a distance and never once up close. She had dark circles under her eyes. She was holding something. She motioned for him to roll down the window. Harold hesitated. Miriam was stirring beside him, making the small sounds she made when sleep released her, and he wanted to protect her from whatever this was, a confrontation, a complaint, a demand that they leave. But the woman didn't look angry. But the woman looked like someone carrying something heavy who had finally decided to set it down. He turned the key just enough to power the window. The cold flooded in immediately, sharp and bright. The woman held out the thermos. "It's coffee," she said. "It's hot." That's all she said at first. Harold looked at her. Miriam was awake now, blinking, reaching for her glasses on the dashboard. The woman looked at both of them, and something in her expression shifted. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself, a flicker of something that wasn't pity, but wasn't distant either. Warmth, careful, controlled warmth. "My name is Della," she said. "I live in the brick house on Chestnut. I've been watching you for weeks now, and I think maybe you need more than coffee. I think maybe you need someone to ask you what happened." Harold didn't cry, but he wanted to. He could feel it building behind his eyes, the pressure of weeks of silence, weeks of holding everything together with nothing but will. But he didn't cry because Miriam was watching, because crying felt like giving up, because he had spent his whole life being the person who stayed strong so that other people could fall apart. Miriam took the thermos. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold this time. She unscrewed the cap and poured coffee into it, and the steam rose between them like breath, like life, like proof that someone had thought about them enough to fill a thermos and walk across a dark street in 29-degree weather just to knock on their window. "Thank you," Miriam said. Her voice cracked on the second word, "Thank you." Della nodded once. Then she looked at both of them, really looked, in the way no one had looked at them in months. The library staff saw through them. The store clerks avoided eye contact. Their own children had stopped seeing them years ago, maybe longer than that, maybe always. But this woman, this stranger, this neighbor they had never spoken to, she saw them. She saw what they had become, and she didn't flinch. "Listen," she said, "I don't know your story yet, but I know that two people sleeping in a car when it's this cold, that's not a choice anyone makes if they have other options. I know what it's like to run out of options, so here's what we're going to do. You're going to drink that coffee, and then you're going to tell me everything, and then we're going to figure out what comes next. Not you alone." They sat in the car for 47 minutes. Harold talked, and Della listened through the open window. Sent her coat pulled tight around her, her breath making clouds that drifted and disappeared. He told her about the house on Marigold Street, about the 41 years, about the mortgage they had paid off and the reverse mortgage they had signed. He told her about Michael's idea, about the roof that leaked, about the letter that arrived like a bomb going off in slow motion. He told her about the children who didn't call, the shelters that were full, the rest stop on the first night and every night since. Miriam added details he had forgotten or couldn't bring himself to say. The cold nights when she couldn't stop shivering, the morning they found ice on the inside of the windshield, the day she realized she hadn't showered in 8 days because there was nowhere to shower that didn't cost money they didn't have. She told Della about the looks they got from people at gas stations, the way clerks watched them like they might steal something, the way children stared and parents hurried them along. She told her about the loneliness, which was worse than the cold, worse than the hunger, worse than everything except the shame. The shame of ending up here after a lifetime of doing things right. The shame of having children who knew and did nothing. The shame of being invisible in a world full of people. Della listened until they were finished. Then she was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was different than it had been before. Rougher, more personal. 10 years ago, she said, I was married to a man who convinced me that everything I owned was really his. He managed the money. He made the decisions. He told me what was true and what wasn't until I didn't trust my own memory. When I finally left, I had nothing. Not money, not credit, not furniture. I had a car and 2 suitcases and a dog who loved me. I drove 8 hours to get here because it was far enough away that he couldn't find me, and cheap enough that I could afford a deposit on a rental. I worked 2 jobs for 3 years. I didn't talk to my neighbors because I was afraid that if I got close to people, they would see how broken I was. They would see the shame I was carrying. So I stayed alone. I kept everyone out. And you know what I've learned in 12 years of doing that? She paused. Harold waited. I've learned that the shame was never mine, she said. I didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you. You trusted your son because that's what parents do. When you signed a document you didn't understand, because someone you loved told you it was safe. That's not a crime. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. The crime is what happened after. The people who should have helped and didn't. The system that let this happen. Your children who have room and money and time and chose to give you none of it. That's where the shame belongs. Not with you. Never with you. The days after the knock were strange and disorienting. Della didn't invite them into her house immediately. She understood, in a way that surprised Harold, that they weren't ready for that. That moving too fast would feel like charity, and charity, when you had nothing, could sting worse than neglect. Instead, she brought them things. A propane heater rated for enclosed spaces, $89.99 from the hardware store, each along with 2 small tanks of fuel, an electric blanket that plugged into the car's cigarette lighter, a cooler filled with food that didn't require heating, apples, cheese, crackers, packets of nuts, bottled water, a package of wet wipes, a prepaid phone so they could make calls without using their remaining minutes. She came every morning and every evening, before and after her shifts, always with something practical, always staying just long enough to talk, without making it feel like an obligation. On the third day, she brought a key. "This opens my front door," she said. "It also opens the side gate to my backyard. There's an outdoor spigot that works, and a storage shed that stays warm if you close the door tight. I'm not saying you should move in. I'm saying if you need a bathroom, if you need to wash up, well, if you need to get out of the wind for an hour, the door is open. You don't have to knock. You don't have to ask. It's just open." It took Harold 4 more days to use the key. Miriam was the one who finally pushed him. "Harold," she said, on a morning when the cold was bearable but her patience wasn't, "we cannot keep living like this just because you're too proud to accept help. This woman is offering us something real, not promises, not prayers, not 'I'll look into it' and never call back. She's giving us a key and asking nothing in return. If we throw that away because it feels like charity, we're no better than David, than Karen, than Michael. We're choosing pride over survival. I didn't marry a man who chose pride over survival. Don't become one now." Harold didn't say anything. He looked at the key in his hand, a simple brass key. Worn from use, still warm from where Della had held it. He thought about the shed in her backyard. He thought about walls that blocked wind. He thought about running water. He thought about 52 years of marriage to a woman who was usually right, especially when it hurt. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The shed became a kind of halfway place. It wasn't a home, but it was shelter. It had 4 walls and a roof that didn't leak, and a space heater Della had installed without being asked. Harold and Miriam slept in the car still. The shed didn't have room for a bed, and anyway, they had grown used to the car, the smallness of it, the way they could reach for each other in the night without moving. But during the days, they stayed in the shed. Della had put a table in there, 2 folding chairs, a rug that covered the concrete floor. There was a radio that picked up 3 stations and a stack of books from the library's free pile. There was an extension cord that ran from the house, powering a lamp, a phone charger, a hot plate that let them make tea and soup without using the camp stove. And there was Della, who came by twice a day to check on them, who sat with them some evenings after her shift and talked about everything except the future, because the future was still uncertain and the present was enough. The question came 3 weeks after the first knock. Della was sitting in one of the folding chairs, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, and Harold was telling her about the house on Marigold Street. Not the loss of it, not the betrayal, but what it had been like before. The garden Miriam kept out front, the tomatoes that grew every summer, was the rose bush that her mother had given them as a wedding present and that had bloomed every June for 40 years. He was describing the way the light came through the kitchen window in the mornings, golden and warm, when Della interrupted him. "Have you talked to your children since this happened?" Harold stopped. The word children sat in the air like a stone. "No," he said. "I called them. Before we lost the house, I told them what was happening. I asked for help." "What did they say?" Harold looked at Miriam. Miriam looked at the floor. "David said he was sorry, but it wasn't his specialty," Harold said. "Karen said she would pray for us. Michael said it wasn't his fault and we should have read the paperwork." Della was quiet for a moment. "And since then?" "Nothing. I haven't called and they haven't called. They know we lost the house. And they don't know where we are. They haven't asked." Della set her tea down. She looked at Harold with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not judgment, not pity, something harder and cleaner than either. "Do they know you've been living in your car for 3 months?" "No." "Would they help if they knew?" Harold didn't answer. He didn't know. That was the worst part. Not knowing what his own children would do, whether they would step up or step away, whether the phone call would change anything, or just add another rejection to the list. Miriam spoke instead. "I think," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "I think they have convinced themselves that we're fine, that we figured it out, that someone else is helping, because if they haven't convinced themselves of that, then they have to face what they've done, what they haven't done. And that's harder than pretending." Della nodded. She seemed to be weighing something, deciding whether to say it. Then she said, "My mother died in a nursing home in Richmond while I was still married. My husband didn't tell me she was sick until it was too late. He said he was protecting me from stress. What he was doing was keeping me isolated, keeping me dependent, keeping me in the dark. I missed her last 3 weeks. I missed saying goodbye. I've spent 12 years being angry about that. And you know what I finally figured out? She paused. The anger was real, but it wasn't useful. What was useful was deciding who I wanted to be in response to what was done to me. I could be someone who stayed bitter, or I could be someone who did better. I chose better, not because my husband deserved forgiveness. He didn't. I chose better because I deserved to not carry him around anymore. She looked at Harold and then at Miriam. I don't know what your children deserve. That's not my call. But I know that you deserve to not carry this alone anymore. And I think maybe, making them face what they've done is part of how you put it down. The phone call happened on December 8th. Harold made it from the prepaid phone Della had given them, sitting in the shed while Miriam held his hand. He called Michael first because Michael was closest, because Michael was the one who had gotten them into this, because Harold believed in a kind of symmetry that life rarely provided, but that he still hoped existed somewhere. The phone rang 4 times. Michael answered with the voice of someone interrupted, distracted, already thinking about the next thing. Hello? Michael. It's Dad. There was a pause. The kind of pause where you can hear someone recalibrating, deciding what version of themselves to present. Dad. Hi. How are you? Harold looked at Miriam. She squeezed his hand. I've been living in my car for 3 months, Harold said. His voice was flat and calm. He had practiced this in his head 100 times, and now that he was saying it, the emotion was gone, drained out, replaced by something harder. Your mother and I have been sleeping in a 2007 Honda Accord in a neighborhood 20 minutes from your house. It's December. It's been cold. We didn't have anywhere else to go. The silence on the other end lasted 7 seconds. Harold counted. Dad, Michael finally said, his voice different now, smaller. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Harold said. In 3 months, you didn't call once. You didn't text. You didn't wonder. I told you we were going to lose the house. You said you were sorry and you asked if there was anything you could do. I said yes, we need a place to stay. You said, let me think about it. That was August. It's December now, Michael. What did you decide? Michael didn't have an answer. Of course he didn't. He sputtered and stammered and said things like, I thought you were staying with friends, and I didn't realize it was this serious. And why didn't you call me again? Harold listened to all of it. He let his son talk because his son needed to hear himself, needed to understand that the excuses sounded as hollow out loud as they must have felt in his own head. When Michael finally ran out of words, Harold spoke again. I didn't call because I was ashamed, he said. I was ashamed that my son, who I raised and fed and clothed and put through college, who sat at my kitchen table for 30 years and ate the food his mother cooked, wouldn't offer us a room without being asked. I was ashamed that asking felt like begging. I was ashamed that I might ask, and you might say no, and then I would have to live with knowing that my son had room and chose not to share it. So I didn't call. I let myself freeze in a parking lot rather than face that possibility. That's on me. But you not calling, that's on you. And I want you to sit with that, Michael. I want you to understand what you did, what you chose, what you prioritized over your parents. The conversation with David was shorter and worse. David listened for 45 seconds, then interrupted. Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back? Harold said no. He said this was the call. He said everything he had said to Michael and some things he hadn't. About the empty bedrooms in David's house, about the holiday cards that came with photos of vacations instead of invitations, about the way David had turned his family into a resume item, something to mention at cocktail parties, but not something to make sacrifices for. David's response was defensive, then angry, then silent. He hung up without saying goodbye. Karen cried. Karen always cried. She said she was so sorry, she had no idea. She thought about them every day. She wished they had told her sooner. Harold asked if she could buy them a plane ticket to Denver. Karen was quiet for a moment, then said she would have to talk to Ryan about it. The timing was complicated. The boys had activities. Maybe after the holidays, things would calm down. Then Harold thanked her for her honesty. He meant it. At least she wasn't pretending she would help when they both knew she wouldn't. The call that mattered came 3 days later. It was from Michael's wife, Sarah. Harold had always liked Sarah, a practical woman, a nurse, someone who said what she meant and did what she said. She called at 7:30 in the evening, and her voice was tight and angry, but not at Harold. "Mr. Benson," she said, "Michael told me what's been happening. He told me 2 days ago, after you called. He didn't tell me before because he was ashamed. He was ashamed that he had let this happen, that he had gotten you into the reverse mortgage, that he hadn't done anything to help. He's been walking around this house like a ghost for 3 days, and I finally made him sit down and tell me everything. Beam, and I want you to know, I want you to hear this from me, that I didn't know. I didn't know you had lost the house. I didn't know you were sleeping in your car. If I had known, I would have driven there myself and picked you up and brought you here. And I don't care what Michael says about space or timing or anything else. You're his parents, your family, and family doesn't sleep in cars while there's a roof available." Harold didn't know what to say. He felt something crack inside him, something that had been holding fast for months, holding against cold and shame and silence. "Sarah," he started, but she wasn't done. "I'm coming tomorrow," she said. "I'm bringing the truck. I don't care what you have or don't have. We're loading it up and you're coming to stay with us. The guest room is ready. It has a bathroom and a closet and a door that locks. You can stay as long as you need, and if Michael has a problem with that, he can sleep in the truck himself." She paused. "He doesn't have a problem with it. He's sitting across from me right now and he's nodding. He's been crying for 20 minutes, Mr. Benson. He knows what he did. He knows it was wrong. He doesn't know how to fix it, but he's going to try. That's all I can promise. He's going to try." Sarah arrived the next morning at 9:17 a.m. Harold had woken early, before dawn, and he had sat in the car watching the light change from black to gray to pale gold. Miriam slept beside him, finally deeply, finally, without shivering, and he let her sleep as long as he could because he knew this was the last morning they would spend in this car. Yeah, and he wanted her to wake into a different kind of day. When the truck pulled into the cul-de-sac, a gray Ford F-150 that Michael had bought 3 years ago, for reasons Harold never quite understood, Harold felt something strange and unexpected. Not relief, not gratitude, not yet. Those things would come later, in the weeks that followed, in the slow process of sleeping in a bed again and showering every day and eating meals at a table like a person instead of an animal. What he felt in that first moment was grief. Grief for the months lost. Grief for the pride that had kept him from pushing harder, demanding more, refusing to disappear quietly. Grief for the relationship he had once had with his son, the one where he could say, "I need you," and know that his son would answer. That relationship was gone. Something else might grow in its place, something chastened and careful, watered with years of work and honesty. But the easy trust was over. It had ended on a phone call in August when Michael said, "Let me think about it," and Harold heard, "I don't want to." Della was there when the truck came. She stood on the sidewalk in her coat, arms crossed against the cold, watching as Sarah helped Harold and Miriam gather their things. There wasn't much. They fit their entire lives into 4 bags in a box, and that smallness was its own kind of grief, a reminder of everything lost. But Della was smiling, and her smile was the smile of someone who had done a hard thing and seen it work. Harold walked over to her while Miriam talked to Sarah. He didn't know what to say. Thank you felt too small. Everything felt too small. "Della," he started. She held up a hand. "Don't," she said. "Don't thank me yet. You're not out of the woods. You're going to have hard conversations with your son. You're going to feel angry and sad and grateful all at the same time, and it's going to be confusing. And some days you're going to want to leave, but you're going to stay. You're going to do the work, because that's who you are. You're the kind of people who do the work. I saw that the first time I looked in your car window. I saw people who hadn't given up, people who were still fighting even when they thought they had nothing left. That's not weakness, Mr. Benson. That's the rarest kind of strength there is." The months at Michael and Sarah's house were exactly as difficult as Della had predicted. Harold and Michael circled each other for weeks, unable to talk about the thing that sat between them. Miriam and Sarah found their own rhythm, grocery shopping together, cooking together, falling into an alliance that transcended the complicated bonds between their husbands. There were arguments. There were silences that lasted days. There was a night in February when Michael finally broke down and said the words Harold had been waiting to hear. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was selfish, and I was scared, and I convinced myself you'd be fine because it was easier than admitting I'd hurt you. I didn't want to face what I'd done, so I pretended you didn't need me. That was wrong. That was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, and I don't know how to make it right, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." Harold listened. He sat across from his son at the kitchen table at 11:30 at night, both of them exhausted, both of them raw, and he thought about what Della had said about shame, about where it belonged, about choosing who to be in response to what was done. He thought about 52 years of marriage, about the plant closing in '94, and Miriam's cancer scare, and David's accident, and every other crisis they had survived by staying together, by refusing to give up, by putting one foot in front of the other until the ground was solid again. "I forgive you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth, too simple for the weight they carried, but they were true. "I forgive you, Michael, not because what you did was okay. It wasn't, but because carrying this is too heavy, and I'm too old, and you're my son. You're still my son. That hasn't changed." He reached across the table and put his hand on Michael's hand. "We're going to figure this out. Together. Man, that's what family does." The house on Marigold Street was sold to a developer who tore it down in April. Harold heard about it from a neighbor who still had his email address, someone who thought he would want to know. He didn't want to know, but he read the email anyway, sitting on the back porch of Michael's house, and he looked at the attached photos of an empty lot where yellow shutters used to be, where tomatoes used to grow, where Miriam's mother's rose bush had bloomed every June for 40 years. The rose bush was gone. Everything was gone. In 6 months, the email said, there would be a duplex where his home had stood. 2 families instead of 1. Different lives, different stories, different memories, soaking into different walls. Harold closed the email. He didn't cry. He had cried enough. But he sat for a long time looking at nothing, feeling the strange weight of watching your own history be erased, knowing that no one who walked past that lot would ever know what had existed there. No one except him. No one except Miriam. No one except the children who had grown up in those rooms and then somehow had forgotten what that growing had cost. Della visited once in May. She drove the 40 minutes to Michael's house on a Saturday afternoon, bringing cookies she had baked herself and a plant for the garden. A rose bush, not the same variety as Miriam's mother's, but close. "Something that blooms," she said when she handed it to Miriam. "Something that comes back every year, even when you think it's gone." They planted it together, the 3 of them. Harold, Miriam, showing Della, in a corner of Michael's backyard that got morning sun. They didn't say much while they worked. They didn't need to. The dirt was warm from spring, and the roots went into the ground easily, and when they stood back to look at what they'd planted, Harold thought about all the things that grow without permission. Gardens, relationships, grief, trust. The small green leaves were already reaching toward the light, unaware of their own fragility, unaware of the cold that would come, and the drought that would come, and all the forces that would try to kill them. But they grew anyway. That was the thing about roses. They grew anyway. Harold is 75 now. He lives with Miriam in a small apartment attached to Michael and Sarah's house, a mother-in-law suite that Michael built himself over the summer, working weekends and evenings, putting in the handrails in the walk-in shower and the wider doorways that his parents needed without being asked. The apartment has 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with windows that face the garden where the rose bush grows. It is not the house on Marigold Street. It will never be. But it is enough. It is more than enough. It is a place where Harold can wake up in a bed instead of a car, where he can hear Miriam humming in the kitchen while she makes tea, where he can look out the window and see something he helped plant thriving against all odds. The relationship with Michael is different now. Not the easy trust of before, but something more honest. They talk about money openly. They talk about fear. They talk about the things they did wrong and the things they're trying to do better. It isn't comfortable, but it's real. And real, Harold has learned, is better than comfortable. Real is where healing happens. David called once, at Christmas, and the conversation was short and awkward. Karen sends cards. She says she hopes to visit someday, though someday never seems to arrive. Harold has made peace with that. Not acceptance, not forgiveness exactly, but peace. Some relationships don't survive what they're put through. Some people can't grow past their own selfishness, their own fear, their own conviction that love is something you feel rather than something you do. Harold knows now that he can't force his children to be different. He can only choose who he wants to be in response to them. He chooses better, Every day, he chooses better. Not for them, for himself, for Miriam, for whatever time they have left. And when the rosebush blooms in June, pink petals soft and full, opening one by one toward a sun that asks nothing of them, Harold thinks about Della, about a knock on a window in the cold dark of November, about a stranger who decided that silence was no longer an option, that looking away was no longer acceptable, that some things matter more than safety and comfort, and the carefully constructed distance that keeps people from hurting each other and from helping each other too. She still calls sometimes. She still visits when she can. She is building a life in that brick house on Chestnut Lane, a life that includes neighbors now, that includes dinners and holidays, and the slow unfurling of connection that happens when you decide to stop being afraid. She is still the woman who never used to wave, but she waves now. Either every time she sees someone, she waves, because she knows, they both know, that sometimes a wave is the beginning of everything. Sometimes it's the first crack in a wall. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between someone and the terrible conviction that they have been forgotten, that no one is watching, that they will disappear and no one will knock on their window to ask if they're okay. If you're watching this right now, I want you to take something from Harold and Miriam's story, not the tragedy of it. The tragedy is common, ordinary, happening right now on streets you drive past without looking. Take the other part. Take the part where someone noticed. Take the part where someone knocked. You don't have to save anyone. You don't have to have answers or resources or the right kind of expertise. You just have to be willing to see what's in front of you and decide that it matters. A thermos of coffee, a key, a rose bush. These things are small. These things are nothing compared to what was lost. But they were given when nothing else was, offered when no one else offered, and they changed everything. That's the truth of this story. That's the truth of most stories, if we're honest. The big moments, the betrayals, the losses, the systems that fail, those make the headlines. But the small moments make the difference. A knock on a window at 6:47 in the morning. A voice that says, "I see you. Tell me what happened. Let's figure out what comes next. Together." That's all it takes. That's all it's ever taken. And that's something any of us can give.